Welcome back one and all to part 2 of this, my keynote presentation at my own Antisemitism Summit. As you'll all know, I am Tom Tanuki, your host and Australia's leading war correspondent, reporting in from the front lines of the battle against Australia's anti-Semitism crisis, leveraged against our Jewish community and our friends in Israel by the Australian far left. In part 1, my handlers at the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council told me that I looked somewhat dishevelled and my setup was somewhat unprofessional. So I've applied to them for funding, a substantial funding for a more appropriate backdrop for the second part of my summit. I think I've outdone Sky News, so big thanks to AJAC. What are we talking about today in part 2? Well, we're talking about perhaps the height, to me, of the anti-Semitism crisis in Australia. That's right, the Acme bomb caravan discovery.
Police have made 3 arrests. Tammy Gay Farrugia, her boyfriend, the caravan owner, Scott Marshall, and a man linked to this trove of stolen so-called kill cars, Simon Lance Nichols. The caravan itself believed to be a Viscount Grand Tourer. On the property where it was found, seized in Dural, the caravan contained explosives and a Jewish hit list. It's suspected the plan was to tow the van to either target, then detonate the power gel explosives, creating a 40-metre blast radius. Catastrophic.
My original idea was to get a big massive Acme box and put it out in the desert next to like a cactus and a tumbleweed and sort of write on it, Acme, bombs for synagogues, watch out, something of that order. And then, just ring up Channel 9 and let them know in like a funny, suspicious voice. But David Adler told me no, and he said, no, let's just get our friends in organised crime to do it. Don't sue me, anyone. I'm just having a little joke. Oh, sorry, just got a call here. Okay. Sorry, mate. I'm being anti-Semitic. Okay, mate. I'll clean it up. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Bye-bye. When the Acme bomb caravan discovery was first revealed to the public, Peter Dutton tweeted, "The revelation of an apparent discovery in New South Wales of a caravan laden with explosives intended for a synagogue is as sickening as it is horrifying. It is a grave and sinister escalation in this insidious rise of unchecked anti-Semitism in our country." Now, his initial reaction really set the tone for mainstream press coverage of the incident, for some time at least. What did not set the tone for anything in particular was my reaction to Dutton's tweet, which is evidenced by its very low likes and views. I don't think anyone saw it. And what I said was, you planted them so that you could do this post, didn't you, Peter? Now, I've since had time and a long chat with my handlers to reflect on my unpopular knee-jerk tweet, and I can see it was rooted in a subconscious anti-Semitic bias. So I am very sorry, and I am hoping / looking forward to some sort of a re-educational AJAC junket in the near future. But anyway, time has proven me, well, not right necessarily, but arguably a bit more on the money than Dutton, certainly. Sure, it wasn't Dutton making the big Acme bomb caravan, but it was an organised criminal who'd fled Australia, allegedly paying random petty crims to do incidents of violent anti-Semitism so that he could offer them up to Australian law enforcement as a bargaining chip. Because it's become clear since that time that the reason someone planted these bombs was so that people like me, the nation's leading anti-Semitism correspondent, and opposition leader Peter Dutton, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for that matter, could all post about the insidious rise of unchecked anti-Semitism in this country. We were all desperate for something to talk about in that respect. So this person was quite on the money in terms of locating what we were so hungry to find. I want to look at a timeline of the things that occurred here. On the 20th of October 2024, a Jewish deli in North Bondi was set on fire. And as far as I know, this was the first of what went on to be a spate of paid-for incidents. On the 6th of December 2024, a fire ripped through Melbourne's Adas Synagogue in Ripponlea. This fire was started by people. It was the most dangerous, I would say, out of all of these attacks in terms of its potential to actually hurt people. I understand that some people, at least one, did get burnt to a degree in escaping from the fire, and there is no doubt that it put people in danger. And again, we weren't to know at this stage that this was also paid for by people hoping to trade information on concocted incidents of homegrown anti-Semitism in exchange for some sort of a reduction in their criminal status, which they thought was a good idea that had potential precisely because of the obvious desperation of our bipartisan leaders in Australia to want to find examples of homegrown anti-Semitism. Now, this was the first point at which Anthony Albanese started talking about the legislative changes that would eventually, only a couple months later, result in mandatory minimum sentencing being introduced. But we'll get to that later. On December the 6th, anti-Semitic criminal mastermind Tammy Farrugia tagged her boyfriend, Scott Marshall, in a post on Facebook. Obviously, you recognise this boomer format that read, "Looking for a caravan for sale, hit me up if you have one, cheers." Someone hit her up and she allegedly bought a caravan. Next day, a caravan was parked in Dural from 17th of December to 19th of January 2025. I hope everyone likes all the stars of David I've got featured in the background in my summit backdrop. Not computer generated, and that's all right. In fact, the substantial funding from AJAC mostly went towards simply design and fitting, because all of these stars of David were ones that I already owned. I had them in my shed, of course, respectfully wrapped up, just awaiting an opportunity like this. As the nation's leading war correspondent from the front lines of Australia's anti-Semitism crisis, I have been gratefully afforded the opportunity by AJAC to take many trips to Israel, the home of democracy in the Middle East, to take a look around and, buy some trinkets. For every Israeli junket I've had, I've collected a new Star of David. So obviously, as you can see, I've had more than a few trips. Like Nova Paris, we're both turning into Stars of David. Here's Nova turning into a Star of David. You'll notice 2 bangles on her arm that have the Star of David on there, 2 chains around her neck she's dripped out in, Star of David, and one on the shirt as well. Most of you would probably say, oh, that's really impressive. For me, it's giving Hamas a little bit, because I don't see why, for example, her glasses panes aren't shaped like Stars of David. But, mostly this is just what friendly competitive locker room banter between us real friends of Israel is like, 11th of January this year, a Newtown synagogue was targeted with swastikas. And on the 17th of January, Alex Rivchin's old house was targeted with anti-Semitic graffiti. 19th of January, this is Tammy and Scott, our anti-Semitic criminal masterminds. The caravan was found in Dural. There were suspiciously obvious messages left inside the caravan addressing a Jewish synagogue, a specific one, and also listing prominent Jewish Australian figures. The police take another 11 days before they go public with this info, right? A couple of days later, on the 21st of January, a childcare centre is set alight in Maroubra, and there's anti-Semitic graffiti that gets sprayed on it. As a result, this is where Peter Dutton first starts committing in public to a spate of, frankly, horrifying minimum jail terms for acts construed of as anti-Semitic, which, given the Zionist politics of these people, presumably includes anti-Zionist sentiment. Now, that's all relevant because these demands start figuring into negotiations between Liberal and Labor on the laws that Albanese is set to introduce not too far into the future.
The frequency is deeply concerning. They seem to be happening on a daily basis or a near daily basis, but also the severity of these attacks, the damage that's being caused, They're now very clearly moving into the realm of national security and domestic terrorism, and the laws around incitement to this sort of violence aren't keeping pace.
Yesterday, opposition leader Peter Dutton vowed to introduce minimum jail terms for acts of anti-Semitism under a coalition government, including 6-year terms for committing a terrorist act and 1 year for displaying the flags of terror groups. It's a policy Alex Rivchin supports.
I think that's obviously part of the solution, and it clearly sends a message to society. I think it will serve as a deterrent to people who would seek to do this sort of thing.
But just as these calls for authoritarian laws are heating up in the public eye, so too are doubts about many of these incidents. For example, it comes out on the 22nd of January that in a court hearing for the guy arrested for the Bondi Jewish jelly fire, that he was basically paid to do the crime by someone calling themselves James Bond, which, lol. Sometimes I wonder, can one experience so many Israeli junkets that they become transracial? I would say likely yes in this case, because, being Israeli is a little bit like saying you're from Hogwarts or Middle Earth. Oh, sorry, phone's ringing. Oh, okay, is that anti-Semitic? Sorry, Mark. Okay then. My apologies. Okay, mate. Bye-bye. Three days after Tammy's arrest and 1 week before any public announcement about the Caravan is made, the head of the AFP says they are investigating. Well, I'll let him say it.
The AFP's investigative lines of inquiry are looking at whether some individuals have been paid to carry out some anti-Semitic acts in Australia. We believe criminals for hire may be behind some incidents. So part of our inquiries include who is paying those criminals, where those people are, whether they are in Australia or offshore, and what their motivation is. There is still a lot of investigative work to be done, and we are not ready to rule anything in or out.
But what we can be sure of is that they started to know more or less exactly what was going on from at least the 22nd of January. Not enough to go public with it, I know, but enough to be able to brief political figures behind closed doors in the federal Labor and Liberal parties about the hoax nature of the incidents. The reason this is important is because we can be 100% sure from at least the 22nd of January onwards that any federal Labor or Liberal Party figure talking about these incidents would have known or have had access to briefings in order to know that these were not authentic, homegrown examples of racism or hate crimes. They would have learned it either from a briefing or from their colleagues. Please keep that in mind, yeah? A week after all that, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns fronts a press conference and reveals the incident, the Dural Caravan Acme bomb incident, to the public and describes it as a potential mass casualty event and terrorism.
Now, I was briefed about the van as well as ongoing police inquiries and investigations over that period of time. I want to make it very clear, please take this threat incredibly seriously.
30th of January, a Jewish schoolhouse in Maroubra targeted with anti-Semitic graffiti. And at around this time, so an ABC report that we didn't get till March tells us, the opposition requested security briefings, one of which was specifically about the Caravan.
The opposition requested 2 briefings from security agencies in January. One was specifically about the Caravan plot. Mr Dutton didn't attend, leaving it to his frontbench colleagues.
Okay, so at this stage the word is out, at least among the halls of power, if not in the public eye, that this specific incident had some big question marks hanging over it. Despite that, Chris Minns introduces 3 laws on the 5th of February to combat anti-Semitic terror. One about making racist speech criminal, another about banning protest and increasing the move-on laws of New South Wales Police, already substantial, near synagogues, and another about banning swastikas near synagogues. A day later, the Albanese government rushed its hate crimes bill through Parliament and got it passed under mounting pressure from the Libs. The bill introduced a raft of, we talked about this earlier, mandatory minimum sentences for terror offences. This is Dutton's insistence. This is after the result of their negotiations with each other. minimum sentences for terror offences, financing terrorism and displaying hate symbols, the government agreed to break its own policy on mandatory sentencing laws, the kind of laws that are condemned by civil liberties organisations, in order to pass the bill swiftly with Liberal backing. After the mid-election attacks began or ramped up on Labor's stance on anti-Semitism in the wake of the Dural Caravan incident. Just 2 weeks later, on the 20th of Feb, Minns's 3 laws are passed through New South Wales State Parliament. Now, this didn't come out till later, not until the recent parliamentary inquiry into all this bullshit, but that confirms that on the 21st of February, the very next day after the last of these authoritarian laws got passed, David Hudson, the New South Wales Deputy Police Commissioner, confirmed that the source that initially reported the Caravan as terrorism plot was discredited, which effectively, as far as I'm aware, leaves only a hoax as a possible explanation for the incidents. So there, from this point, is presumably no other working possibility for the police about what this was, apart from a series of hoaxes paid for by some random crim. Despite the hoax being all but evident by this stage, on the very same day, Peter Dutton was out there in the media sphere talking about deporting any non-citizens found to be engaging in his weird, vague definition of anti-Semitism.
Well, the Section 501, or the character provision of the Migration Act, is the one that we use for the cancellation of bikies and pedophiles and rapists, etc. So people are non-citizens and they've committed a crime against an Australian citizen, we deport them, and we did over 6,000 of those people when we were in government. We would extend that to include acts of anti-Semitism and from the 7th of October. We just don't tolerate hate in our country.
2 days later, Sky News hold a Mickey Mouse anti-Semitism summit, clearly copying my own proper summit format. Chris Minns reiterated his commitment to his draconian laws introduced in the wake of some hoaxes.
Friends, in our last session of Parliament, we introduced new laws that target this kind of racial hatred in our community. Stronger laws, which send a stark and impossible to miss message that these are serious crimes and they must carry new sentences. That tranche includes a new offence targeting the display of Nazi symbols on or near a synagogue, and laws designed to stop people from harassing other people or intimidating other people from recognising their religion and worshipping at religious buildings.
But perhaps most shockingly of all, Executive Council of Australian juryman Alex Rivchin gets up before this hyper-partisan media audience, including some of the most powerful people in the country, and outlines a series of proposals for what we must do about this rise of anti-Semitism in Australia that border on outright fascist. We're supposed to declare martial law or a national emergency, demolish academic freedom, buff up the Migration Act and basically get mass deportations going, do judicial inquiries into academic freedom. Absolutely fucking shocking stuff.
The federal government should declare the existence of a national emergency and establish a joint... There should be a national ban on encampments and a ban on the disruption of lectures by student protesters. There needs to be legislation to overcome restrictions on disciplinary action against academics. The term academic freedom is not a blanket defence for egregious and unprofessional conduct. The Migration Act should be enforced or, if necessary, amended so that anti-Semitic conduct is grounds to refuse a new visa or cancel an existing visa.
Seriously, it's hard to put into words my distaste for this fascist prick. I said, oh, hang on a sec. Yep. More anti-Semitism, more unchecked anti-Semitism. Okay, sorry. The rise of my anti-Semitism appears to be unchecked. Are there any sort of junkets focused on rehabilitation for this kind of thing? Because if there is, I'm just letting you guys know, I'm all for it. You know, I'll jump on the first plane, business class if you could, but just not to be greedy, but just, you know, the long flight and all. Okay. Oh, yes, no, I'd be happy to bunk with Greg Sheridan. No worries. Yeah, no, happy. Love the team on the Australian. Okay, then. Meanwhile, Mike Burgess is on 60 Minutes telling Nick Mackenzie, and therefore the public for the first time, that many attacks, including the synagogue firebombing and the Caravan, were created by organised crime. So this is when we all start catching up.
I would have never imagined that outlaw motorcycle gangs would be on our target list.
That seems rather significant that outlaw bikie gangs are now ASIO targets.
If you're tasked by someone from overseas and you're a criminal and you're doing that for a fee, and it is a threat to security, then ASIO will be on your case. I reckon that's going to be a problem for you.
It all falls apart in the public eye by the 10th of March when this New South Wales Police and AFP press conference is staged.
Almost immediately, experienced investigators within the Joint Counter-Terrorism team believed that the Caravan was part of a fabricated terrorist plot, essentially a criminal con job. This was because of the information they already had, how easily the Caravan was found, and how visible the explosives were in the Caravan. Also, there was no detonator. Today, I can reveal that the Caravan was never going to cause a mass casualty event, but instead was concocted by criminals who wanted to cause fear for personal benefit.
A Sydney businessman who fled Australia while on bail for alleged drug importation has been named as a suspected key player in the fake Caravan terror plot. The Sydney Morning Herald is reporting Sayet Iran Akka is wanted by police and that authorities believe he's been living in both Turkey and Asia since 2023.
The plan was the following: organise for someone to buy a Caravan, place it with explosives and written material of anti-Semitic nature, leave it in a specific location, and then, once that happened, inform law enforcement about an impending terror attack against Jewish Australians. We believe the person pulling the strings wanted changes to their criminal status, but maintained a distance from their scheme and hired alleged local criminals to carry out parts of their plan.
This is when the blame game begins, now that this starts falling to bits. Here's Tony Burke saying that Peter Dutton, as we talked about before when we went through the timeline, deliberately avoided being briefed himself.
We were publicly saying he should get a briefing from the Australian Federal Police. Peter Dutton made a decision to avoid the Australian Federal Police. He deliberately avoided being briefed, even when we kept saying that he should be getting a briefing. And as a result, he was effectively reading from a script that may as well have been written by organised crime. I am glad that the extraordinary physical actions of violence that have caused so much publicity or threatened violence, I wish they weren't happening at all. Now that we know what it is, then, at least that is not from a deep-seated hatred within the Australian community.
And I'm glad that Tony's glad, but frankly, I also think he should be ashamed too, because his party at state and federal level participated in a bipartisan legislating and endorsing of authoritarian anti-democratic laws, and neither of them have talked about walking them back since we all found out about the hoax nature of the incidents. So after all this, my junket buddy Sharry Markson got Alex Rivchin on to twist himself into a pretzel about the whole affair. Apparently, according to Alex, these recent revelations don't make the matter not a case of anti-Semitism, they actually make it even worse.
We have to understand that the revelations from these investigations were incredibly serious. We learned that in addition to everything we faced over the past 17 months, the doxing, the vilification, the harassment, everything happening at schools and universities and the medical system and support for terrorism and street abuse, on top of all that, you now have hardened criminals paying off lowly hoodlums to set fire to our buildings and cars and set our streets ablaze with reckless disregard for what happens. And it's a miracle that no one was killed. But for some reason, the police, in announcing this, chose to completely downplay it, refer to it as a con job and a fake and all these sorts of things. And predictably, that set off a whole stream of conspiracy theories.
Listen, as a result of the work of people in public like this fascist prick, hand in glove with Labor and Liberal, we have listened to the most powerful people in this country openly table the notion of, if not actually legalise, overriding academic freedom, criminalising protests near places of worship no matter the circumstance, mandatory minimum jail sentences for protest and for anti-Zionism, declaring a national emergency essentially to militarise the response to these things, shutting down the freedom of students to protest openly, and mass deportations. So I don't want to hear from this prick about conspiracy theories, because in response to one random overseas criminal's seeded conspiracy theories and hoaxes, we've become a lot more anti-democratic, and it's absolutely fucking deplorable. All it took was one cashed up idiot, allegedly, who fled the country and is presumably hoping to come back to exploit this raging political urge to fuck us all over. And they did it very well for a while. You know, these pollies took the bait, hook, line and sinker. Neither of them, under any circumstances, ought to deserve, I would suggest, our vote in the federal election in Saturday. If anything to do with truth and integrity is on our minds when we head to the ballot box, as a consequence of this evil absurdity. You know, neither of them, I would suggest, deserve a mandate to run the country at all. You know, they make me... Oh, I'm doing it again? More unchecked anti-Semitism rising? Okay, sorry about the rise in anti-Semitism. It's really sweeping us all up, isn't it? Very hard to recognise, isn't it? It's everything these days, hey. Okay. Oh, you've put me to the front of the queue. You've booked me into business class. I'm on the next flight. Thank you so much. So sorry about the rise of anti-Semitism. All right, mate. Bye-bye. Well, this summit is over, guys. I'm on a flight. It's junket time. See you later.